Hello and welcome. My name is Aaron Rosenfeld, and I'm the CEO of the Marion and Aaron Gural JCC. The Gural JCC has been serving the community for over 40 years, and we are thrilled to be part of the Community Coalition, standing together for peace and tolerance here in the Greater Five Towns, along with many distinguished community organizations and individuals, some of whom you'll hear from today. We have a great panel and speakers who I know will enlighten and inspire us. I also want to acknowledge UJA Federation of New York, without whose support this program would not be possible. We thank you for joining us on this very important day to celebrate and honor the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose message of peace, tolerance, and equality is as important today as it was 50 years ago. Coming together to learn, volunteer, and help others is the essence of what it means to be a caring community. Our work together highlights the love and respect that already exists in our community. As Dr. King said, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. We hope that this day of service will be the beginning of a year of peace, love, and tolerance for our entire community. I will now turn the mic over to my friend and colleague, Kay Brent Hill, Executive Director of the Five Towns Community Center.
Thanks, Aaron. And thank you for joining us on this MLK Day of Service as we, the Community Coalition, honor the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy of peaceful protest against discrimination and bigotry. Like Dr. King, we're joining hands to build bridges. The documentary, The Memphis 13, is about a group of families that join hands with grace and courage to desegregate their local school system. We're going to show you a clip from the film. Please look out for the entire 30-minute documentary on YouTube. It's very powerful. Our panel discussion will be moderated by Michael Cohen. He's the Eastern Regional Director of the Simon Wisenthal Center. He's also a Community Coalition partner. To quote Frederick Douglass, without struggle, there is no progress. And now a clip from Memphis 13.
When the Memphis City Schools Charter was adopted just after the Civil War, it mandated the segregation of students based on race. This was consistent with Tennessee laws as well as the social customs of the Jim Crow doctrine of separate but equal throughout the South. Segregation, particularly in schooling, was not only about separating the races. In terms of facilities, resources, and outcomes, separate was not equal. In May 1954, the United States Supreme Court declared in Brown v. Board of Education that in the field of public education, separate but equal has no place. The Brown decision threatened to upset the entire social order of the South, although leaders in Memphis greeted the decision nonchalantly. Outside of Memphis, the decision triggered great change both within schools and in society at large. In East Tennessee, the integration of Clinton High School in 1956 led to a violent protest. Across the river nearby Little Rock, the entry of 9 students to Central High School in 1957 led to a showdown between the state of Arkansas and the federal government in Washington. On the momentum of the Brown decision, the civil rights movement marched forward in Montgomery and Greensboro and Nashville. Yet in Memphis, public schools remained completely segregated. Facing such inaction, the local branch of the NAACP took action. The local lawyers filed suit in March 1960. The lawsuit, known as Northcross versus Board of Education of the Memphis City Schools, challenged the district's continued operation of a segregated system.
All we wanted was equity in education. We wanted those kids to get the same facilities, the same teaching as far as quality is concerned. Resources generally have followed white children in public schools.
Having watched their southern neighbors endure the outbreak of violence that was ushered in by desegregation, the NAACP came together with an idea which they hoped would avoid violence completely.
We thought we would do something different, and that is start with first grade. In all the other places, they started with high school. Our contention was that, no, those white high schoolers are already tainted. First graders, no. Let's go with first grade.
Desegregation would occur in 4 elementary schools: Bruce, Gordon, Roselle, and Springdale, taking place during the first week of October. A small group of civil rights leaders led by Maxine and Vasco Smith, Russell Sugarman, and others set out into the neighborhoods of Memphis searching for volunteers for their cause. But their search was more difficult than they had anticipated. Finding black parents of first graders was simple. Convincing them to enroll their child in an all-white school was not.
I can remember it was a weekend. We worked, we knocked on doors, and it wasn't easy. And I can understand it better now than I could in 1961. We're asking parents to send their 5 and 6-year-old children into an environment that I don't know if we would have gone.
Hi, my name is Michael Cohen, and I'm the East Coast Director of the Simon Wisenthal Center, but very proudly a member of the community coalition that we've built here to really bring our community together. And I think this event is so perfect to be an event of the community coalition to make sure that we celebrate Martin Luther King Day and make sure that we demonstrate the importance of its messages and importance of what it brings to our community. But today, I'm really honored to introduce our featured speaker, Ms. Dwania, a civil rights activist and wellness consultant who in 1961 was among the brave first grade students known as the Memphis 13, the smallest pioneers of the civil rights movement, who helped desegregate the Memphis public school system. And Ms. Kiles is the eldest daughter of pioneer civil rights activists, late Gwendolyn Kiles and Reverend Samuel Billy Kiles, who on April 4th, 1968, were the only other person on the balcony with Dr. Martin Luther King when he was fatally shot. And she, her mother, and siblings were prepared to receive Dr. King at their home that evening for dinner. I would also, before I go over to Ms. Kiles, would say, I've had an incredible pleasure of getting to know Ms. Kiles over the last number of years. And in the interest of bringing people together, I'll say we had an event with Ms. Kiles about 2 years ago, right before COVID, where she came to speak in New York City before the New York City Council's caucuses, both the Jewish caucus and the Black, Latino, and Asian caucus. And in those caucuses, there was a member who said, there was never a time that they remember where those two caucuses came together for an event. And it took somebody of the stature of Dwania Kiles and the messages that she brings to make sure that we can really see the importance of bringing people together. And with great pleasure and great honor, Dwania, I look forward to hearing your story and having you. And thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
I thank you so much, Michael. Michael knows how I feel about him. He has some of the greatest stories in the world. I am waiting for his book. Every time I see him, I'm pushing him to make a book, to write a book. But I really am honored and humbled to have the opportunity to be here with the different coalitions to talk about what that experience as being one of the smallest pioneers of the civil rights movement, what that was like, what that is about. And I just want to thank you guys for allowing me to come and share this story. And it's definitely an interesting story, and it's a powerful story. And it's so interesting. And I was saying to Michael, when I look at the film, I see how since the documentary was done by Daniel Keel, who grew up in Memphis and now teaches law at the University of Memphis, how I now have a voice. Because when I look at the film, I do a lot of and all of trying to find the words to talk about the experience. because at the time, as a 5-year-old, I did not really know how traumatic it really was. And that speaks to the fact that my parents did such a good job of making sure that not only me, but my siblings and we always felt very protected. So when I think back on that experience, it was extremely traumatic, to say the least. And it was very interesting because that first day of school, I'm just wanting to go to school like any other child that wants to go to school and have friends and play and, you know, play all day. That's really what first grade to me was all about. It took my father to remind me that I did not go to another school, because as I had imagined it in my mind the whole time, I always thought I'd gone to the neighborhood school that my brother had gone to, but actually I'd only gone with my grandmother to pick him up from school. So my siblings and I were, what did they call us? The Irish triplets or whatever. We were literally 15 months apart. And I can never tell this story without talking about my parents, because my parents were living in Chicago in what was called the Promised Land. Black people would leave the South to go to Chicago to have a better life. So as children, they both left the South, my mother, Georgia, my father, Mississippi. And I later found out that my father left Mississippi because his father, who was also a minister, said, I got to get my boys out of here because some young boys had been killed down in Mississippi. He said, I got to get my boys out of here. And so that was the motivation to get them to Chicago. And then my grandmother married someone on my mother's side, and that's how they ended up meeting in Chicago. But in their early 20s, with 3 children under the age of 4, they decide they're going to pick up, move to Memphis because they want to be a part of the civil rights movement. So they were 25 years old, 25 or 26 years old. And in doing so, immediately got involved in the NAACP, of which my father was on the education committee for the NAACP, along with Maxine Smith. But they had been, just because we actually didn't desegregate the schools until 1961, they had been trying ever since, 1955. So 1961 was the year they settled on it, that 5-year-olds were going to do it. I think the Board of Education decided they wanted to do 5 years old because they didn't think they would be able to find any parents that would send their 5- and 6-year-olds to school. And then the NAACP thought it would be a good idea because they didn't want the kind of violence that had been shown at Little Rock, at Central High. They didn't want that kind of violence attached to the process. So that's how they settled on going with 5- and 6-year-olds. And the reality is we did not start when schools started. We started a couple of months later because it was very difficult to find families that would allow their 5- and 6-year-olds to be a part of the process. So that first day of school, fortunately, I knew one of the kids well because his father was attorney A.W. Willis, who, and most of the other people in Memphis were like from Memphis or from close, not from Chicago coming in. But I knew Michael because our families were very close and they lived around the corner from us when we were living on Greenwood, which was where we lived before we went to the school. And so I felt okay that first day. I was happy going to school that first day, and then, it was like it was so much excitement. It was a bunch of people. I was all excited. And I can never thank Ernest Withers enough, a photographer. Ernest Withers one of his most famous photographs is the I Am a Man, you know, with the 1,300 sanitations and I Am a Man. But he was there that day. Ernest Withers was like your family uncle or something like that. So he was always there taking the shots. So it's really through the pictures that he took that I really could see my mood, how happy I was that day going to school with my mother and my father, driving in the car. As a matter of fact, I think that that image not only is the three of us that desegregated Bruce, because of the 13, they split us up amongst 4 schools. So 3 went here, 4 went to Gordon, 3 went to one of the other schools, and that was the way they did it. So Michael, whose name now is Fomby, Harry and I, we all went to Bruce. And, you know, lots of images. Ernest Withers took lots of images of us. So he's got the image of us in the car where we're all looking out of the car, and it's my mother's in the front seat. And it's really interesting because when I look at that image, I don't really look at us. For some reason, I always look at my mother. And as a mother now, to just even feel what she must have felt to be putting her baby in that situation, you know. But anyway, we were all happy. It was all good until we got into the school and my daddy had to leave, because I think my father was the one that actually walked me up to the steps. And Dad always said that there was no howling mob, but that the police were the mob. And he said some of the things that they said, I will never repeat those things. Fortunately, I was small enough to not be able to hear it, what he heard, you know, and everything was good. And until he had to leave, you know. And it's not that I remember so much from the day, but Ernest Withers took a picture later, you know, after the day, and I look very different. I'm very sad. I'm very sad, as opposed to the way I looked when I went. And of the 13, I was the only one that actually went all the way from the 1st through the 12th grade. So I never went to an all-Black school. I always stayed in the school as it became more integrated, and went to the middle school, Bellevue, and then graduated from Central. So by the time I graduated, I had a lot of friends. But the thing that was really so interesting as a child having that experience was that you went to school and the white children didn't want to play with you and called you names. I remember I remember as a 1st grader being in the bathroom, and if I didn't go with my class, if there were older girls in, they would want to open the door so they could see my tail, because I was supposed to have a tail, because Black people had tails. And, you know, and definitely being called names. And Fonby in the film at one point said, well, I didn't get called nigga a whole lot, you know, but yes, that did happen. But usually that came from the older kids. It didn't come from the 1st graders and the 2nd graders, you know. So by the time I think by the time I got to the 2nd grade, my brother was there. But it was extremely traumatic, because not only did you go to school and people didn't want to, you know, your teachers didn't want to call on you, they just wouldn't give you a break. But then you go home. You go into your you go back home to your neighborhood, and the children there in your own community didn't want to mess with you because you think you're better than us. Well, no, that's not the case at all, you know. But so it was like, where do I find my peace? And fortunately, that was at church, because my father was a minister, and that was at church. But by the time I graduated from high school, you know, I had a great mixture of friends, and I really would not trade the experience that I had, even though I know my father, you know, and my mother, they really felt guilty sometimes. But even in the film, I think my dad said it had to be done and somebody had to do it. And there was no way he could go out and ask other families to put their kids out there and not put his own. I tell people often, I just happened to be the right age at the right time. It could have easily been one of my siblings. I was the right age at the right time. But what I'm also, what's also very curious is how being the first, even though they came later, the difference, you know, of the imprint that it made on me as opposed to my brother and sister who had an easier flow into it as opposed to a 5-year-old going to school for the first time. So, and, you know, before I could get over the trauma and shock of all of that, you know, that was 1961. In 1968, April 4th, because of the sanitation strike, and Martin Luther King Jr. was in Memphis to head marches and deal with that. He was assassinated on his way to our house for dinner. So, and it's a 12-year-old now getting beat up at school because, you know, I was actually in the march that broke up in violence. And not in the front. We were in the back, and that's where it started first. So my sister got really maced. I was running through the mace. We were running back to the church, you know, to get out of harm's way. My mother was with my youngest brother. My father was over to the side. We weren't in the front of the march. We were like in the back. To actually live through something like that, I don't even know how to explain that to somebody, really, you know, what that was, the fear, and at 12, now I know what I'm doing. I'm fully aware of what I'm doing and what's going on. And then, you know, to actually get the opportunity on April 3rd to actually meet well, I had met him before, but this was really up close and personal after the mountaintop speech up on the dais and so forth and so on. And he's coming to the house the next night. I am thrilled beyond, you know, to the moon. I've never experienced a high and a low like that in that amount of time. You know, I remember my mother talking to my father. I remember my father saying, we're getting ready to get in the car. I remember that, you know, I remember how excited we were. And you go from just this kind of high to the lowest low possible, and what that evening turned into. So before I could even fully deal and get over the trauma of, you know, of the desegregation process, I'm expecting Dr. King to come to our house for dinner, and with all these ideas floating around in my head, and that never happened. What happened was his brother came to the house later that night. There were other dignitaries that came. There were other people that were leading the march that came. I never in my life had seen men not just cry, but weep. But I never knew until 30 years later when my father was chairing one of the commemorations on April 4th, because usually he couldn't be in Memphis for it. Very few times was my father in Memphis for April 4th. But this particular time he was, because he was co-chairing the committee that was honoring King. And he did a book, and he gave me one, and I read it. And my brother in the book talked about the sound that A.D. King made when he just let go. I've never to my life heard anything come out of another human being like that. And to be 12 years old and all of this is going on, and you don't really know what to do with all of this, what's happening, because it is just so deep and so heavy and so emotional that, you know, I'm just happy that I can live. I have lived to be able not to just talk about it, but to process it. And it has everything in the world to do with what I do in my life right now, with me being in the wellness field, with me promoting what breath, because I'm a breath coach, and how that plays in actually getting us in touch with ourselves so that we can become more, we understand what self-love is and love ourselves so that we can love each other. And I could go on and on, but I'm 16 minutes. So let me stop right there.
Dwania, thank you so incredibly much for that presentation. And we are really privileged to have, somebody such as yourself who both is able to continue all these years in speaking and in telling your story and making sure to use it for the purposes of what Martin Luther King Day is about and bringing us all together. I want to take a moment to also bring in and introduce our really incredible panel here tonight. We really have some very special people from our community who we look forward to hearing from. First, I want to introduce Rabbi Kenneth Hain, who has served as the rabbi of the congregation Beth Sholom in Lawrence, New York, the oldest Orthodox synagogue in Nassau County. From 1999 to 2001, Rabbi Hain served as the president of the Rabbinical Council of America and has also served as a president of REIT's Rabbinical Alumni. In 2008, he was named among the top 25 rabbis in America by Newsweek magazine. So Rabbi Hain, we are very privileged and thank you to have you here tonight, and really thank you for joining us. We are also joined by Dr. Ann Pedersen, who is the superintendent of the Lawrence Public School District on the South Shore of Long Island. Dr. Pedersen has worked in the Lawrence School District for 28 years as a teacher, as a principal, and as an assistant superintendent before assuming the superintendency 4 years ago. So Dr. Pedersen, also thank you so much for being here and allowing us the benefit of your experiences here tonight. And we also, my good friend, Reverend Gregory Stanislaus, who's also been a part of the coalition since its founding, has been the pastor at St. John's Baptist Church in Inwood for the past 24 years. He also serves as vice principal at William Alexander Middle School in Park Slope, Brooklyn, and he is married and the proud father of 5 beautiful children. And I can only imagine, knowing my wife and I have 6, that how much credit you get in that regard. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here tonight. So I guess I first want to ask the panel. We've seen this incredible video and had the privilege of hearing live right here from Ms. Kiles about these experiences, which we only read in textbooks and learn about, and to hear it just in such a powerful message and such a powerful way really has to have an impact on all of us. And I'd just love to initially just ask each of the panelists if you could just give an initial first impression, an initial impression of what your thoughts are after hearing that, and how you think it relates to our community here.
Who's first?
Rabbi Hain, if you'd like to lead off, that'd be wonderful.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here with all these wonderful people. Look, I can remember where I was standing when I heard that Martin Luther King was killed. It was also, it should be remembered, a time when enormous shocks were occurring in America. Assassinations not that long before of JFK, of Robert Kennedy, and then Martin Luther King. It was such a heroic time and yet horrific time. We had these great heroes. And for a kid like me, as a teenager experiencing that, it was overwhelming. Plus, I had this unusual sort of background, I suppose. I was an Orthodox kid who grew up in a town in Virginia. We had a small Orthodox shul there. some amazing rabbis, and some amazing families, many of whom, some of their children, including my own, live in Israel today. It was an amazing place. But Danville was, according to Martin Luther King, absolutely the third worst town in the South in terms of racism. It was a close, between Selma and Birmingham. Actually, the night before Kennedy was shot, Martin Luther King was in Danville, Virginia. They were preparing a major push there, and it was a brutal time. Beatings, any peaceful demonstrations were met with severe force. And you can Google it. Just take a look at, it's called Bloody Monday in Danville, Virginia. And it was a culmination, obviously, of a long history. So as a Jew growing up in that environment, I have no doubt, because I saw Jews marching with Martin Luther King. There were Yeshiva University students, not only students from Jewish Theological Seminary and Abraham Joshua Heschel, who walked with him and marched with him. We were inspired, but we also had to walk a tightrope because we were whites and we were living in a racist white community. So those are some of the dynamics that have certainly been a part of who I am. And for better or for worse, I think it's shaped my rabbinate in very real ways in terms of how I look at the world and how I think about things and people. But no doubt, the sacrifices that were made by not only Martin Luther King, but so many people who were brave and in the face of real danger. I'll just conclude with this. My best buddy growing up was a Catholic. And he got me one day when I was home from yeshiva to go out and watch a Klan meeting. And we hid in the trees and saw an actual Klan meeting. I have never been able to forget that. And it was all about Jews and it was all about Blacks. So I think it's important to remember that relationship, what we share, and hopefully to be able to, even in these difficult times now, uncertain times, to maintain those values that we both cherish.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Hain, for those incredible remarks and your background. Obviously, those are things that really touch our soul in understanding better. Over your decades of incredible service, what helped shape that. And thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Dr. Pedersen, if we'd love to hear your.
I was so struck at the concept of what it must have been like for you to be 5 and 6 years old and go into that setting. I began my history in Lawrence as a kindergarten teacher, of 5-year-olds. But when I first came to Lawrence, what I was so pleased by was the diversity of my kindergarten class and the friendships that were immediate. That the differences they noted in one another or the types of backpacks that they had selected to come to school with. It was never about the color of their skin. They were friends. They were just a beautiful cohort of children. So I was always very proud to be, and I continue to be very proud of Lawrence. But back in the 90s, so I began teaching, I think maybe 1993, and here I had this beautiful group of 5 and 6 year olds. But the truth is, in Lawrence at the time, and I didn't know it as a new teacher, but at the time, just the kindergarten was together. And then the classes, when they moved on, they separated out. So I have such a recall of my first year teaching in Lawrence, taking my children out, my beautiful diverse class outside, so they could line up to the receiving first grade school they would be going to. and noticing a stark difference in those lines. And it was children of color seemed to be going to one school and some to the other, and other children weren't. And I'm pleased to say that no longer happens in Lawrence. The children all stay together all the way through their journey. But when I started to speak to people about that noticing, the people said that they couldn't wait for their children to be back at the middle school age because they would be all together again. And so I was, people were smarter than the institution is what I saw. And so I think that we as a community, again, stand at even more diverse now than we did then. And an opportunity like this to speak to one another helps to bring us all together and to acknowledge that. So I'm so happy that I got to hear your story, and I'm so happy to be amongst this panel.
Thank you so much for those insights, Dr. Pedersen. And obviously your experience in having taught students that are of that age that Dwania experienced, that incredible, call it trauma, call it experience, call it what you will, but having that kind of understanding of the children of that age really brings a whole different perspective and a better understanding just what Dwania really went through, and knowing what it's like to go through that at that age, what kids these days are experiencing, that thank God because of Dwania's groundbreaking work, kids our age, kids that age at this point don't have to do what she did. And I want to thank you very much, and I want to pass along for a second to Reverend Stanislaus, who I have had the great privilege to get to know over the last couple of months on this coalition, and to really start building a relationship with. So my good friend Reverend Stanislaus, if I'd love to hear, we'd love to hear your impressions as well. And if you're with your multiple capacities, both from the pulpit and from the educational components.
All right. I want to say that I am humbled by this experience. This from all the panel, the story from Rabbi Hain and Dr. Pedersen, whose predecessor was Dr. Schul, Gary Schul, and we did work together. But Ms. Kyles, you are amazing. You're absolutely amazing, and I'm humbled just to hear the story. And I will never forget you because your name is Kyles. My middle name is Kyle, so I'll hope happens to be that. But what I do remember growing up in the East New York section of Brooklyn, in the Van Dyke houses, the projects, and one morning my dad woke us up, and my brother and I, and he said, we're going to go on a trip. We never went on trips. We never had the money to go anywhere. So somehow he got these bus tickets. It was August 28, 1963. And I was, I think I was 5. And he took us to see Dr. Martin Luther King on the March on Washington. And it was like hot. And I remember saying, Dad, why we're here? He said, this is history, man. You have to be here, And I just cherished that he had the wherewithal to bring us, my brother and I, there. And then he sent us to the Catholic school a couple of blocks away from the projects where we grew up. He believed that was a better education. So all the money they had, they paid for us to go there. And I remember sitting in class on August 4th, 1968, when Dr. Martin Luther King was killed, and coming home and walking home, and how the neighborhood was being torn down. And, I just saw people ripping things down and fires. It was just, I would never forget that, And then I hear your story about desegregating, and I end up in this middle school in Park Slope after pastoring for 30 years in this middle school, and it was predominantly Hispanic and Black, but I've been there for 34 years, and so over the years it has changed. It went from being a tough school as you want to call it, to being a gifted and talented school. And so the color of the school totally changed and shifted. And so I think the Department of Education or the chancellor decided that they don't call it desegregation. They called it diversity, to diversify the school. They didn't do it with race. This was 2 years ago. They do it with income. Low income or special education would make up 52% of each school in this particular district. And the other 48% would come from other students, but it was total lottery now. You didn't have to have grades to get into the school or, get high scores, which was the way it was before. We just kind of picked the students we wanted into school. That totally changed about 3 years ago. Now, this is the thing. The day that happened, my principal decided to take a project. She became a mentor for a year. They needed someone to take over the school for 1 year. And who did they choose? They choose me to take the school for the year that this change is taking place. And I, for the first time, I guess I woke up to seeing that implicit bias and race was still alive, and things I had to deal with in that year. We made it through the year and we diversified, but what I'm saying is in 1961, when you went through that, and now we're in 2021, and we're still dealing with a lot of that. It's different, but it's the same, And so, and we see the students that are coming in now, and I'd be careful that they come in, they're not what teachers expected to be gifted and talented in terms of academics. And so now if a teacher is so used to teaching up here, you don't really have to teach. These are students that were in the school, their parents ensured that they were going to be successful regardless. So you may have become a little comfortable teaching. And so now when you have students with really some serious needs in terms of bringing them up to speed, it's taking a lot to really educate all the teachers and work with everyone to do that. But I would just think that it would be further along than it is now, and so the same people that are in schools are the same people in church. And so we're doing everything we can in church. And I guess educators attract educators. So we're starting to get a lot of educators joining the church. So we'll be doing some extra work, but there's still a lot of work to be done. But I'm humbled just to be on this panel. I really am. And my experience is limited to that. But I'll say this, and if I can just end with this, that I got accepted to the University of Southern California. I never had a Black professor or a Black teacher in my life until I went to the university in college, even in high school. I went to straight Catholic school all the way through. And I remember the day I had to leave Brownsville, East New York. And my mother said, "You're taking a part of my heart with you. Don't break it." I said, "I won't, Mom." And she said, I have to get you out because it's not safe for you now. It's just these things that we're dealing with, but we're constantly dealing with this stuff, and it's tough. But I love this coalition. I think we're going to do great things together, but there's still a lot of work. And Miss Kyles, you changed my life, and I want to thank you for the impact that you made on me. Thank you very much.
Reverend Stanislaus, thank you so much for those really powerful words and powerful remarks. To kick off, I guess, our next question, I'll tell you, from both your remarks and I know from what Hain mentioned his experience in seeing the KKK through the trees, it reminded me of probably what I would say is the most interesting car ride I've ever had in my life. There was a time about 1.5 years ago or 2 years ago, which was actually the day that Dwania and I actually happened to have met for the first time face to face. And we were doing a series of events, trying to also bring people together. And we had an unbelievable combination of 2 speakers that were going to be speaking at each of these events. It was Dwania, and then it was an individual named T.M. Garrett, who was the former European, I guess, executive director of the KKK, who had, really not somebody who had just been a fellow traveler, but somebody who had been a serious leader in those movements and had turned his life around to the point where he had actually opened up a not-for-profit to make sure to bring people out of those movements and speak around the world at universities, at schools, and at schools in the 5 towns as well. In terms of making sure that people understood, from him how hate, how he ended up hating and how we can conquer hate, and that there is hope for defeating hate. And here I am in a car with Dwania Kyles of the Memphis 13 and T.M. Garrett of the KKK, and wondering as we're driving for about 45 minutes from event to event, how these conversations are going to go, and wondering, and seeing how that interaction was. And one thing we all saw was from that entire really inspirational day is, that change is possible, and change from the really the largest depths of hatred that could exist could be transferred in such a way if we're able to understand that hate, and if we're able to have the fortitude and the work and the rolling up our sleeves to make sure that we can be a part of making that transformation possible. So I'd really love, especially considering each of our panelists is in education and is in, or from the pulpit, and is dealing with our youth and dealing with our communities on a regular basis. I'd love to hear for a quick moment from Dwania what her experience in that day was like, also from what she heard, but also to hear from each of the panelists of what else can we be doing in our community, or what are we doing in our community to continue making those kinds of changes and speaking to our next generation. But Dwania, if you want to just kick off, I'd love to hear that quick.
You're talking about when you and TM and I were in the car on our way to Jersey.
Yes.
Well, I knew what to expect from the conversation, because we did that in 2019. TM and I met in 2018 at the 50th commemoration of the sanitation strike and Martin King's assassination. So we already had a relationship, and we already had conversations. And during that time, we were always running into each other. But I first met him at the Withers Museum on Beale Street in Memphis. And when they introduced him, I just thought that was the greatest story. And, we immediately started talking about how powerful it would be if the two of us could be on the same platform, sharing our stories, so that people could actually see a model of what overcoming hatred, really, what does that really look like, and what does that feel like, I wasn't surprised by the conversation, Michael. You were new to the conversation, but and TM and I, we still stay in contact to this day, talking about the different platforms that might be available for us to take our stories on. But remember what TM talks about. TM talks a lot about compassion. So while we roll up our sleeves to do the work, we also have to open our hearts. And to me, that's where we struggle. That's where we struggle. Because if we were really dealing from a place of love and what that feels like, but the reality is the trauma that we've all experienced for whatever reason, real or not, the trauma that we've experienced, it's like has a hold on us and won't allow us to feel good, doesn't allow us to be happy. And when we can't be happy, and when we can't deal from that space of love, and we're only dealing with, we're reacting, is what we're doing. We're just reacting to something because I'm mad and I'm not breathing because no oxygen is going to my brain. And so I'm just a hot mess. We're overworked. We're stressed out. And here in America, we are some of the sickest people in the world. You can't be happy when you're not well. You can't be. So all of those things. So what does self-love look like? It doesn't just mean that I buy expensive things for myself. How do I take care of myself? How is my health? Well, how is my, how am I doing? How is my family doing? And I tell everybody, when you're healthy, you're happy. And I can, and then we can begin to deal from a space where I feel good, I feel happy. I'm not just reacting to something because I'm mad all the time, because that's what we get fed. We get fed all the worst all the time. And we are just, whether the government is involved or not, there's so much money in this country, you know, that is ridiculous. So what are we spending it on, and why are we spending it on these things? Why aren't we really reaching out to each other? It's one thing, and oh my God, wait, let me look. What, I can't even, why can't I think of his name? The judge, you know, who really orchestrated Brown versus Board of Education. Intellectually, we can know what's right and wrong, but when we try to change something, and we don't change the heart, and we don't change the energy behind it, that's going to be a hard sell. That's a hard, you know, I feel like desegregation, because what, 60 years, like 55 years later, I was doing an interview. They did a mural of us at the school a couple of years ago. I was doing an interview, and one of the journalists said, well, what do you think? The school system is as segregated now as it was 60 years ago. Well, how do you feel about that? I said, well, let me say this. Let me say this straight up. Right now, we didn't change people's hearts. There was something for them to do, but their hearts weren't changed. So all they did was create another space for us to go and do the same thing in. And so we've got to get past that point as far. So how, you know, it's important for forums like this, for people, for us to come together, to hear each other's stories. And that was what really united me and TM, because people, when we tell people the story, they're like, oh my God. No, but we stopped. We took a moment. We loved ourselves. TM's story is amazing. You know it. You know, Michael, it's an amazing story.
I thought one of the beautiful things of that day was we were able to actually bring together organizations. We had the NAACP, the Urban League, the Wisenthal Center, 2 yeshivas, all working together in that. And it was really just an unbelievable combination that nobody could have ever possibly thought of or envisioned, you know, just how many years ago. And, you know, I'd love to hear, you know, as we have such incredible leaders here, you know, I'd love to hear for, the impressions, you know, of each of our panelists, and how that relates to the communities that we all represent here, you know, both from the pulpit and from the educational perspective. Rabbi Hain, if you can, you know, I guess, let us know for a moment, you know, what your impressions and your thoughts about how we can, what do you think we're doing now that we can improve on, or what are we doing in our communities now that that can help bring us closer together?
Well, I think the main point I would say is keep doing what we're doing, expand it, grow it, make it more engaging for more people who might otherwise feel pretty alienated maybe from something like this. We're living, as we've, in many ways, in our own silos, like societies have for millennia. So it's hard to break that down. You know, I've certainly tried. I miss my old friend, my Catholic counterpart for so many years, and we've tried in many ways through common ground, places like the Lawrence Cedarhurst Fire Department, for example, which has been a wonderful experiment in really integrating people from all parts of the society here. We need those points of interaction. Tough to do in this, certainly in this moment, but I think this is a great effort. I'm glad to give it whatever help I can and introduce it more to our community and to our congregations. So I think it's so needed, and our kids need it. They need to be educated. They need to actually see differences and how small those differences are.
Absolutely. Yeah, it reminds me, there was in Englewood, New Jersey, there's always an MLK rally and then a march to one of the local churches. And before the last, I believe it was last year, right before the pandemic, Rabbi Hain, who I'm sure you're familiar with, decided that Congregation Avodah Torah there was going to organize a march from the Congregation Avodah Torah to the site of the initiation of the march. So this way there was an ability to show not just that everybody was working together, but the dedication of the community to working together. And I know I brought all of my children, and getting a couple of young children in the middle of February to walk a mile is not the easiest thing to do, and get a lot of bribes of ice cream and pizza. But
right. Well, Rabbi Heshi Billet and I marched together in the local Black Lives Matter demonstration or march. We got a little bit of flack, but on the other hand, our pictures were in the paper showing that, and I'm sure there were diverse reactions to that. But I think it's so important.
No, absolutely. It's that, and that leadership of yours is really something that should be a light into all of us. Dr. Pedersen, I'd just like to shift for a second. You with your incredible role in educating our community and the students in the community here, if you can just give us your thoughts on all of this and what we're doing in the schools, what we're doing in the community here to make sure to bring folks together and try to conquer those issues which we've just been discussing regarding hate and regarding the segregation and regarding all of that.
It speaks so loudly to me. I get all excited about this because I sometimes I think in education, people think that we are just speaking to the head, right? And we are. We want kids to read. We want them to think mathematically, but we have to teach the heart. And I am so afraid of the seeds of hate that get sprinkled in hearts and the way they get sprinkled about, and we never know what happens, right? It's there, and then how do we counter that from growing within an individual? So we have to constantly model. We have to replace it with love. We have to lead with peace, right? We have to change the world with peace and send those messages to the students. And I think that as a community, we really have to call out hate and just not let it comes out so many different ways. And my biggest concern is that it lands in the hearts of our children. And I don't know what happens to it after that, right? But it's not good. So we have to work real hard to make sure that what lands in their hearts is love, and that we model what we can do with peace.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for all that you do for the students in this district. Reverend Stanislaus, you also have spent many years in education while being at the pulpit also. So you affect the families that you affect in so many different ways. If you could speak for a moment on what do you think, both from the pulpit and in the communities, and also from the educational perspective, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And what more can we do in bringing local communities together?
Well, when I speak about the Black church, I'm only talking about, I'll be careful, I'm talking about St. John of Inwood, where I'm at. And I realized over the last 10 months of this COVID experience that health is very important. When Black and brown people were getting sicker and dying faster during this COVID experience, it's about health and comorbidities. And so I pulled the leadership together, and I said that we really cannot just stay the course. We have to have some kind of missional transformation going on. And if we can have 10 months of not being in the building, and we haven't been in the building, we've been virtual, and membership seems to be growing over the virtual. and people are doing more virtually. You know, I mean, a half hour on virtual, and then they go out and they do stuff, and I give them an assignment, go touch people's lives. I think it's a horrible experience. Pandemic was horrible and continues to be horrible, but we believe all things work together for good for those who love him. And so out of this experience, the church is going to shift. It's no longer going to be, I came into a traditional church. No longer can it be a place where we just go to and almost become just the group of us. And if anyone wanders in, they can become part too. But now it's that mission that Christ has given us to go out. You know, the church is not the church. We are the church. That's a place where we come together to congregate. But it's gonna change, and it's gonna be about health. It's gonna be about education. The ministries are gonna shift and change, because it's a terrible thing when you have nonprofit organizations doing the work more than churches. Okay? And so we should be the hub of that. And that's almost becomes an embarrassing thing, although financially we're doing fine and people are dressing fine and that's just not what it is. And if that has to continue, then I can't be part of that. So we're going to have some missional transformation taking place. And I know a lot of members are going to see this, so they're going to hold me to it if they don't throw me out. That's
hopefully after 24 years, you've got a little bit of credibility, a little bit of an ability to withstand that. But that really is a very interesting and critical perspective about the role of our religious institutions and how juxtaposed to our not-for-profits and how that all interplays. And one of the things that I know you and I have spoken about, and we've spoken about at some of these coalition meetings, after the first event that the coalition took on, which was really an introductory event and showing that we were together at both the JCC and at the Five Towns Community Center, in waving flags and having T-shirts showing us together and just making an impression that we are here together, we are in everything together, and we are going to be there together. Post-mortem conversation about, well, where do we go from here and what did this achieve? And one of the conversations that we had was look at just, for the multitude of meetings, unfortunately by Zoom and not in person at this point, that we had to discuss and plan that event, how we got to know each other, how we got to build a relationship with each other and understand the levels of commonality that we have, but also to understand, our different ways of thinking, of what's going to impact your community or this community or that community, to bring it together. And what is the communication methodologies? What are the message importance? What messages are more important? And how do you put all that together and build a successful event? And that planning process in itself, we all had discussed, was so critical to all of us just building relationships with each other. And so I know our time is short, and I'd love to really ask each of the panelists, and before I get to Dwania one more time, and really ask an overarching question of with the population that each of our distinguished panelists serve. When you hear MLK Day, and when you hear that all of the celebrations and commemorations and the impact that it's supposed to have on all of us, what does it mean? What does it mean to you in terms of what it should mean to the populations that you serve? What are the messages besides the commemorations and the historical significance? What do you think that brings to the communities that you serve, and what are the messages that you want the communities that you serve to understand coming out of such an important day? So I guess I'll stick to the alphabetical order that we've been going in so far, as it's been working. Rabbi Hain, if I can point to you, that'd be great.
I'll be quick. Work to reduce the fear. Work to try to reach the fact that so many people are not connected because they're afraid of the person they don't know, who doesn't look like them, doesn't worship like them, doesn't talk like them. That to me is the challenge, and the only way to break that down is to do what you're doing.
Thank you.
bring us to that. Right.
I'm sorry. I don't know if I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, it's all good. At this point in my career, I like to be cut off.
Dr. Pedersen?
You know what? I think that this Martin Luther King Day always is an opportunity to allow our students to see who a hero is, right? To have an exemplar, to really understand that this is the big picture, that this is what a person can do. They can embody peacefulness, they can be passionate, and they can create change. And so I think that they get caught up sometimes in who they're looking at. And it's really important that we turn their eyes, and that's how we get to their hearts. We turn their eyes and we look at the exemplar and we say, what can we learn? How can we be like that?
Thank you so much. Thank you. You know, it's like I said, you know, in your position, it's so critical to have somebody who thinks like you and who forwards these messages to all of the students in the community. Reverend Stanislaus?
You know, growing up and attending Catholic school, which was a great education for me, but I never heard Black history. I was never taught that in elementary school, but in Catholic school, we went from kindergarten to 8th grade, so I didn't get it from 8th grade. Then I went to Nazareth High School, and I went Catholic school from 9th to 12th grade, so I didn't really get it. Whatever I got was at home, and we read, not nearly enough. But when I got to college, I started taking courses and reading as much as I can. And I think that's what I've done for my children, you know, educate them in their history, and that, you know, Dr. Martin Luther King was more than just the I Have a Dream speech, and that you have to read all of his stuff and know how powerful he really was, and then listen to all the different stories of different people. And that's another element we've been doing at the church, you know, teaching children that, but at the same time, not doing it in such a way that causes you to separate from other people. Just understanding that there's great value in who you are, you know, and that there are heroes like Miss Kyles and all those on the panel right here, regardless of race, creed, or color, that we can listen to the stories. And I think you said it, that change is not that difficult. It seems very difficult, but we can grow and change from that. And so I'm just excited to be part of this group. I'm excited about the ministry all over again, you know, kind of re-fired up to do things over the last couple of months, and the stories. I want to hear everyone's story. I think the stories is really where the power is, you know. So thank you for that.
No, I'll say, Reverend Stanislaus, I fully agree that a critical element is each of the different, you know, various communities understanding each other's narratives and understanding, you know, how much more we share than how much more divides us. And, you know, one of the stories that I know I tell often, and in some of our conversations prior to going live on this panel, I delved into slightly was, you know, when I was a young Capitol Hill staffer working for the Congressional Black Caucus for a member Adolphus Towns, how when we were trying to put a Black Jewish Relations conference on Capitol Hill together, one of the things that I was tasked with was going to try to convince Congressmember and civil rights icon John Lewis to be part of that coalition and part of that meeting. And, you know, me naively went into his office and somehow got in front of him and started trying to preach to John Lewis on the importance of bringing people together in my naivete. And, you know, you know, he was incredibly gracious and right away jumped on, you know, loving the fact that here was some, you know, young 20-something who was so passionate about bringing people together that he jumped on board. And, you know, I think I shocked Congressman Towns in that, you know, in 20 minutes coming back to him and saying, yeah, I got John Lewis, what's the big deal? And part of, you know, the big deal ended up being is, you know, now you've had somebody who, when he almost fell off his chair, realizing you did what, you got what, all of a sudden it made me realize I better look at who this person is. I better understand his history. And you know, once I realized who he was and studied up on who he was and ended up building a little bit of a relationship there, and realized how embarrassing it must have been had I realized who he was when I approached him in such a manner. it allowed me to learn about other communities' heroes, which in a sense should be all of our heroes. And the ability for us to understand who each other's heroes are, the ability to understand why they're our heroes and how they have the passion and the guts to bring people together and do the kinds of things that folks like John Lewis and MLK and so many other incredible leaders were able to do. Just like our own Dwania Kyles here, is really, I think, a critical piece of us understanding each other better, us understanding each other's history better. And I think once we do that, and with the help of all three of our panelists, who, as you can see, have dedicated their lives to bringing people together, I think we can make this world and our community, and with this coalition as a vehicle as well, a much better place. So I'd love, in closing, Dwania, thank you so much for you being here tonight. Thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you so much for your friendship. And if you want to give you an opportunity to say some closing remarks, we'd love to give you the floor for that.
This was so great. So I thank all of you all for participating and sharing, because this is where we come to fill our tanks up so that we can go back out and do the work that we do and love the work that we do. So, Martin Luther King Day to me will always be, I don't know if you all have had the opportunity to see Witness from the balcony of room 306, which is my father talking about his experience being on the balcony. And because he was only 5 steps away from Dr. King when he was assassinated, but he ends it with saying, the dream is still alive. The dream is still alive. The dream is still alive. And in the words of my father, I couldn't think of a better thing to say. The dream is still alive. And we are the people that help to continue to make that true. And let's just keep doing what it is that we're doing and modeling it. I'm just so thankful that you had me as a guest. Thank you.
Well, Dwania, thank you so much for giving us your time tonight. It means the world to all of us, and to all of the viewers and all of the communities around. And we look forward to having you as a leader for many, many years to come amongst us all. And I really want to thank each of the members of our panel, Rabbi Hain, Dr. Pedersen, Reverend Stanislaus. Thank you so much for your incredible insights, and like I said, for all of your work in the community. May you all be blessed to continue doing this kind of work for many, many years to come. I also just want to, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Brent Hill and Aaron for their work in as well as part of the coalition, and in introducing us tonight.
Let us turn our thoughts today to Martin Luther King and recognize that there are ties between us, all men and women living on the earth, ties of hope and love, of sister and brotherhood, and we are bound together in our desire to see the world become a place in which our children can grow free and strong. We are bound together by the task that stands before us and the road that lies ahead. We are bound, we are bound.
There's a feeling like the clenching of a fist. There's a hunger in the center of the chest. There's a passage through the darkness and the mist. And though the body sleeps, the heart will never rest.
Shed a little light, oh Lord.
Shed a little light, oh Lord.
So we can see.
So we can see.
Just a little light, oh Lord.
Just a little light,
Wanna stand it on up.
stand it on up, yeah.
Stand it on up.
Stand it on up.
it on down.
Shed a little light, oh Lord.
Can't get no light from a dollar bill.
Can't get no light from no dollar bill.
Don't give me no light from a TV screen.
Oh no, 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 no.
When I open my eyes, I wanna drink my fill from the well on the hill.
And I know you know what I mean.
Shed a little light, oh Lord.
Shed a little light, oh Lord.
So we can see,
oh yeah.
just a little light, oh Lord.
Just a little light, oh Lord. Can we stand it on up?
Stand it on up, stand it on up,
Oh Lord, walk it on
walk it on down. Shed a little light, oh Lord. There is a feeling like the clenching of a fist.
There is a hunger in the center of the chest. Oh no.
There is a passage through the darkness and the mist.
Oh no. And though the body sleeps, the heart will never rest.
Let us turn our thoughts today to Martin Luther King and recognize that there are ties between us, all men and women living on the earth, ties of hope and love, of sister and brotherhood.